A millionaire built his life on code, control, and trust in the wrong people. But when his 8-year-old daughter found a hidden camera, everything unraveled. Betrayed from within, he uncovered a conspiracy that would test not just his genius, but the strength of the family he chose. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and support the channel. We truly appreciate it. Now, let's begin. Nicholas Harlan had built his entire life around the art of control. From the way his systems handled billions of lines of encrypted code to the precise architecture of his home security network, nothing ever slipped past him, at least. That's what he believed. His reputation as a cybersecurity mastermind had earned him immense respect and even more substantial wealth. Investors trusted his instincts, governments sought his counsel, and competitors feared his silence. Behind closed doors, however, Nicholas preferred a quiet life, isolated in a modern fortress of steel, glass, and biometric locks. His world was designed for efficiency, order, and impenetrability. 3 years earlier, everything changed when he adopted Isa, a quiet girl with an unusually sharp mind. Isa had a way of noticing things that others missed. Nicholas had never planned on becoming a father, much knows a single one, but Isa's presence rewired something in him. The first time in his life, someone depended on more than just his intellect, they depended on his heart. It was a change he welcomed, cautiously. At the time, Sabrina entered his life too, a poised and brilliant consultant who understood both his world and his vulnerabilities. She slipped into the rhythm of his household, like she belonged there. At least that's what it seemed, until the afternoon Isa walked into his office and pointed toward a painting above the bookshelf. Nicholas hadn't thought twice about that artwork. Sabrina had suggested it weeks ago, claiming the space needed something warm. He let her place it there, distracted by work and reassured by routine. But now, something felt off. Isa's tone was steady, her gaze fixed. When he followed the line of her sight, something inside him shifted, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Vulnerability. That night, Nicholas disassembled the frame. Behind the canvas, nestled so precisely it could have been designed for the spot, was a miniature lens, blinking faintly in the dark. Shock didn't come right away, only the cold logic of deduction. Someone had placed a surveillance device in his most private space. It's a room where he wrote code, tested protocols, brainstormed projects worth billions, his sanctuary. And someone had violated it without a trace. That required knowledge, intimacy, trust. He didn't sleep. Instead, he spent the night tearing apart every room with quiet precision. Not in anger, but in the methodical way a surgeon would examine tissue for hidden disease. One camera turned into 2, then 3. One near Isa's room, another angled toward the garden. The feeds weren't being stored on his local servers. They were routed elsewhere. Hidden tunnels in his own systems, carved out without his knowledge. The encryption was advanced, cleverly disguised beneath layers of redundancy. Nicholas wasn't just being watched, he was being studied. The realization grew heavier with each discovery. This wasn't random espionage. It wasn't a competitor poking around or a hacker trying to make a name. This was internal, personal, calculated. He reviewed recent system updates, checked logs, looked for unusual access patterns. Some of them traced back to scheduled absences, business trips, media appearances, keynote talks. Moments when the house was left under the care of 2 people, Sabrina and Miles Brennan, his CFO and closest friend. Miles had been with him from the beginning. They had co-founded the company in a garage when all they had was caffeine and conviction. Sabrina had only entered the picture later, but she had quickly become indispensable handling strategy, smoothing investor relations, even helping restructure internal protocols. Nicholas had trusted them both. He had let them into his home, his heart, and now, house he had built as a sanctuary felt like a trap. What unsettled him most wasn't the presence of the cameras. It was the timing, the precision. Whoever installed them didn't just want to watch, they wanted leverage. Something was building beneath the surface, and Nicholas was no longer ahead of it. The thought left him nauseated. But amidst the paranoia, there was Isa. She had seen it first. She had said nothing until she was certain. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with fear, it was with clarity. In her, Nicholas found a strange comfort, not because she made him feel safe, but because she reminded him that vigilance didn't always come from firewalls and algorithms. Sometimes it came from quiet eyes and unsaid instincts. As morning light filtered through the windows, Nicholas stood in the center of his office and felt the full weight of betrayal before even confirming who had betrayed him. Somewhere in the wires, in the walls, in the spaces he once considered untouchable, someone he loved had planted seeds of deception, and he was going to find out who. Nicholas didn't speak about the cameras to Sabrina. Not yet. He knew that rushing into confrontation without certainty would only make the guilty more cautious in this case. The danger wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Someone wasn't just invading his privacy. They were positioning themselves to take everything he had spent a lifetime building. The algorithm was the crown jewel of his company, and while parts of it were patented, the deeper functions remained offline, stored only within his private vault of code. Whoever installed those cameras wasn't just trying to learn about him. They were trying to replicate him. He began quietly scanning every inch of his home. No corner escaped his scrutiny, not the vents, not the light fixtures, not even the ornamental pieces Sabrina had so generously gifted over the past months. Yessa, always by his side, followed his lead without question. She didn't ask why they were dismantling pieces of the living room, or why he pulled every hard drive from the network and inspected it manually. She simply observed, absorbed, and helped. What might have been a traumatic experience for most children seemed to activate something deeper in her, a hunger for answers. Nicholas kept detailed notes on every anomaly, missing files, unusual system pings, redundant backups that had no reason to exist. The more he looked, the more patterns emerged. The home automation systems had been subtly rewritten, nothing drastic. Just small changes in the code that allowed for remote access, if you knew where to look. There were scheduled tasks buried beneath layers of decoys, set to erase logs, redirect network data, and mask unusual activity. It was genius, in a quiet, parasitic way. It was also familiar. The signature of the breach, the structure of the code felt eerily close to his own. Someone had studied him, intimately. Not just his work, but the way he thought. It narrowed the list of suspects dramatically. That's when Issa mentioned the piano room. It was a detail he would have missed. Space rarely used, filled more for aesthetic than function. But Issa had noticed something. The smart lighting system behaved differently there. Slight delays, a flicker when powered on. Nicholas pulled the wiring panel and discovered the fourth device smaller, more advanced, and streaming silently too. An unknown offshore server. His heart sank. This wasn't a one-time breach. It was a network. It was methodical. And it was escalating. He ran tests overnight, simulating different conditions to trace external access points. The signals bounced through a complex web of proxies, but a few careless moments had left trails. They led back to internal machines once assigned to trusted personnel. And again, the same name surfaced. Sabrina. Miles, Nicholas remembered. The company retreat 6 months earlier, the one Miles had insisted on. A chance to unplug, he'd said. Sabrina had stayed behind to handle logistics. That was when most of the system changes had occurred. That was when a new mirror server had been configured, one Nicholas never authorized. One that now carried fragmented traces of his algorithm. He dug deeper, retrieving timestamp data from his physical drives, comparing it to the central repository. Dozens of lines had been cloned, tweaked, moved, not enough to notice day to day, but enough to recreate something powerful if someone knew what they were doing. Nicholas sat in the dark of his office, lit only by the glow of a dozen monitors, and for the first time in years he felt the chill of betrayal, not as a theory but as a certainty. The betrayal wasn't random, it wasn't impersonal, it had been cultivated through intimacy. Sabrina hadn't just positioned herself beside him emotionally, she had studied his routines, mirrored his language, embedded herself into his systems. And Miles, the man who once shared his ambition, who celebrated the company's milestones as if they were family victories, had been pulling threads from the inside. Nicholas reviewed his last meeting with Miles. His demeanor had changed subtly. But now it all clicked. The shift in eye contact, the deflection in conversation when technical updates were mentioned, the careful redirection of Nicholas's attention elsewhere. They thought he wouldn't notice, but now he had. And with that knowledge came clarity. He wasn't going to confront them with anger. That would be easy, predictable. Instead, he was going to build something better than a firewall. He would build a trap one sophisticated enough to draw them deeper, one quiet enough to keep them from realizing they were already inside it, and he would not do it alone. As Issa curled up on the couch near his desk, watching animated lines of code dance across the screen, Nicholas realized something that struck deeper than the breach. The person who saw it all first wasn't a business partner, wasn't a strategist, wasn't a friend. It was an 8-year-old girl who knew how to see what others ignored, and from now on, he would see with her eyes too. Nicholas didn't believe in coincidences, not in life, and certainly not in code. Over the years, he had trained himself to detect even the faintest irregularities, a misplaced bracket, an unusual syntax, a request that didn't belong. Now, he began to look at his own life with the same clinical precision. Every message, every calendar change, every interaction with Sabrina and Miles became part of a larger pattern, one that had been forming long before the first hidden camera had started recording. The deeper he dug, the more deliberate it all became. The home network, once designed as a closed-circuit vault, now revealed secret tunnel software backdoors subtly embedded in minor updates, cleverly disguised as routine system maintenance. These weren't accidents. They were exploits created by someone who understood his style, his logic, his rhythm of thinking. Issa watched him work for hours. Sometimes she asked questions, sometimes she simply listened. And sometimes, when he got too close to a dead end, she would point to a line of code or suggest a file to recheck. She didn't speak much, but when she did, Nicholas listened. Not because she was a child with questions, but because she was often right. It was during one of those long, silent sessions that Nicholas discovered the mirror server on almost perfect replica of his main architecture. Hosted externally, encrypted, and logged under dummy credentials. At first glance, it looked like a backup test environment. But the algorithm fragments told a different story. Whoever had access to that mirror server had begun piecing together his core logic, a driven, predictive model that made his company invaluable to clients across the globe. Even incomplete, it was worth millions. Finished, it could surpass everything else on the market. It was no longer fully under his control. He checked the access logs. The data showed staggered imports during his known absences, always within the same windows of time. He aligned the timestamps with Sabrina's stay-at-home periods and Miles's office logins. They fit too perfectly. The final proof came in the form of a corrupted cache. Nicholas retrieved from one of his personal network hubs. It contained a brief segment of surveillance footage, likely left behind due to a failed export. In it, Miles could be seen in Nicholas's office, alone, typing on his personal terminal. Sabrina entered shortly after, whispering something. They both looked toward the painting above the bookshelf where the first camera had been hidden. Nicholas watched it in silence. The betrayal had a face now. Two, in fact. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. Simply sat back and closed his eyes, letting the truth settle into his chest like an anchor. These weren't just people who had betrayed his trust. They were people who had used his own love, his routines, his vulnerabilities as weapons. But not everything had gone their way. They didn't expect. Issa, they didn't expect a child to see. The blink of a lens, they didn't expect. Josephine either. The housekeeper had worked for Nicholas long before Sabrina arrived. She wasn't tech-savvy. She didn't understand code or servers. But she understood people. She had noticed subtle shifts, conversations that stopped when she entered a room, door locks that clicked too quickly, Sabrina's curious habit of straightening things in rooms she didn't belong. When Nicholas finally sat down with Josephine and asked her carefully, cautiously, if she had seen anything unusual in the past few months, she didn't hesitate. Quietly, she recounted moments she had dismissed at the time, Miles arriving unexpectedly when Nicholas was away, Sabrina insisting on redecorating rooms that didn't need change, the way both of them seemed too invested in his schedule. Josephine may not have known how to explain metadata or packet loss, but her memory was precise. And in those memories, Nicholas found the final pieces he needed. He wasn't dealing with a crime of opportunity. This was a slow burn, a long con, an erosion of trust performed over months, maybe years. Miles and Sabrina had positioned themselves like chess pieces, anticipating every move, exploiting every blind spot. But their strategy had a flaw. They underestimated how quickly Nicholas could recalibrate, and they underestimated the strength of the people they ignored. Josephine had become a sentinel of truth, unnoticed but unwavering. Issa, with her quiet intelligence, had been the first to pierce the illusion, and Nicholas, he had been wounded but not broken. He began crafting a response, not a simple confrontation, a full operation, one that mirrored the sophistication of the betrayal. False logs, controlled access, a ghost algorithm that mimicked the real one, but with embedded triggers. The goal was simple: draw them in deeper, let them think they were close to success, then trap them. Nicholas was done watching now. He would let them believe they were still winning while he built the framework that would destroy their entire plan. And when the moment came, it would be Issa who'd flip the final switch. As the days passed, Nicholas's home transformed into something far more than a sanctuary of glass and circuits. It became a war room, silent, focused, methodical. Yet behind the flickering monitors and digital traps, a deeper war brewed beneath the surface. One not just of code, but of trust, pain, and self-recaning. Nicholas wasn't merely building a counterattack. He was rebuilding his foundation, bit by bit, person by person. He gave Sabrina no reason to doubt him, kept their shared routines, intact meals, briefings, even the occasional smile at her subtle affection. But behind every nod was calculation. Every casual conversation became a performance. He couldn't let her see the shift in his eyes, the clarity that now burned behind them. With Issa and Josephine as quiet accomplices, Nicholas constructed the illusion of vulnerability. His emails, once airtight, began to carry hints of confusion. His systems showed small security errors, all intentional. They weren't flaws, just bait. Meanwhile, Josephine ensured the house ran as usual, her hands steady, even when the weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air. Issa, in her own quiet brilliance, began mapping timelines. She'd taken to sketching out patterns with colored strings. In pins on a corkboard in her room, a method Nicholas had once used when tracing international threats. When he walked in and saw her work, he didn't feel concern. He felt awe. She was connecting motives, dates, meetings. Her innocence never blinded her to the truth, and somehow that gave Nicholas strength. But there were moments when the emotional toll cut through the strategy. At night, when the house went quiet and Issa had gone to bed, Nicholas would sit in his office and remember. He would replay moments. With Miles, their first investor pitch, their late-night coding marathons. The jokes that only two minds wired the same way could share. Then came memories with Sabrina's soft mornings, whispered encouragements. The belief that he had finally found someone who didn't just admire him for his mind, but cared for the man behind it. Now he saw it all differently. The encouragements had been strategic, the intimacy, transactional. The access she gained wasn't accidental. It was designed. Still, there was a part of him that questioned himself, not his plan, but his judgment. How had he let them in so far? How had he, the master of security, left his own heart so exposed? The emotional reversal didn't come as a sudden wave. It was a gradual shift. It came in Josephine's steady hands placing tea on his desk with a subtle nod of understanding. It came in Issa's voice as she asked questions not to be reassured, but to learn. It came in realizing that while he had been betrayed by the people he once called partners, he had also found unwavering allies in the places he least expected. Nicholas knew the next steps had to be executed with precision. He created the ghost algorithm, a version of his true code. Brilliantly convincing on the surface, but laced with embedded traps. If someone tried to export it, it would trace the route and expose the endpoint. If someone tried to run, it would inject false predictions, revealing the user to any system monitoring its behavior. It was elegant, ruthless, and entirely his. He then constructed a fake vulnerability inside the company's beta system. Subtle hint, just enough. To be noticed by someone looking for leverage, Miles took the bait within 48 hours. Nicholas monitored the logins in real time. His heart didn't race. He had trained himself to stay calm under fire. But the ache in his chest deepened. He knew what came next. Sabrina's final test was personal. He sent her on an errand, just a fabricated schedule adjustment to cover. For Miles. While she believed he was in a remote board meeting, Nicholas watched her enter his private office, override the local encryption, begin copying files to a clean drive. She didn't hesitate. That was the final fracture. The emotional weight of it didn't hit. Until she sat briefly at his desk and smiled at his monitor, as if she had already won. In that moment, Nicholas understood something profound. She never truly loved him. She admired his brilliance. She envied it. And when she couldn't own it, she decided to steal it. But if betrayal had a shape, and so did loyalty, Josephine, who had been labeled just a housekeeper, had helped him without question. Even when she didn't fully understand the digital world around her, she had stayed steady and loyal. Issa, just a child by the world's standards, had become a guardian of truth. Her clarity, her courage, her refusal to look away when something felt wrong, she had done what entire cybersecurity teams failed to do. She saw the invisible, she felt the cracks before they widened. Nicholas realized then that this was never just about saving his company, it was about reclaiming his life. And that kind of war wasn't one with revenge, it was one with precision, it was one with truth, and it was time to let it unfold. The stage was set long before dawn. Nicholas had spent the previous night stitching every digital thread into place. The ghost algorithm lay gleaming on a hidden partition. The remote tracer waited behind a line of innocuous shellcode. The legal team, bound by ironclad NDAs, remained on standby with synchronized timestamps tied to his private server. All that remained was to let the betrayers step into the light of their own making. He rose early, guided not by habit, but by a calm born of certainty. Issa and Josephine met him in the kitchen, the hush between them thicker than the steam rising from their mugs. No words were needed. Each understood the part they would play. Issa slipped away to her room, where a single keystroke on her tablet would activate the tracer's final handshake. Josephine moved through the house with the same practiced ease she had shown for years, though her eyes lingered on Nicholas's heartbeat longer, offering silent resolve. At 9 o'clock, Miles arrived at the office as if nothing lay in the balance. The morning brief proceeded with polite efficiency. Earnings projections, expansion plans, market chatter. Nicholas listened, noting the way Miles spoke of future initiatives, visions built on technology, already siphoned to the mirror server. Every confident phrase felt like an echo of stolen code, yet Nicholas remained unflinching, nodding in the right places, adding a comment here and there to mask the tightening perimeter. Mid-meeting, he introduced a critical hotfix to the development branch. An upgrade, he claimed, would harden their predictive model before an upcoming government audit. Miles's enthusiasm was immediate. Sabrina's text arrived seconds later, praising the fix and begging a quick review. The hook had landed. Back at the house, Sabrina's car rolled through the gates just after lunch. Livestream feeds, hidden in plain sight, captured her swift stride toward Nicholas's office. Josephine, dusting shelves in the foyer, noted the exact moment the door closed behind her. Issa, eyes locked on her tablet, watched a flurry of access tokens light up across the network. With a gentle tap, she executed the tracer. Packets split, multiplied, and shot through encrypted tunnels like silent flares, marking every hop Sabrina's device took on its way to the mirror server in the downtown headquarters. Nicholas tracked identical activity on Miles's terminal. His friend believed he was alone, leveraging a local exploit to mirror the hotfix. The ghost algorithm began to download a near-perfect copy seeded with logic bombs that would trigger on first compile. Timestamp logs captured each byte. Transferred, each unauthorized query executed under Miles's credentials. Every action mapped 2 IP addresses, GPS pings, and biometric login stamps. The evidence grew layer by layer, incontrovertible and cold. At precisely 2:30, the tracer completed its loop. Legal notifications, pre-drafted and authenticated, deployed to regulators, board members, and law enforcement liaisons. Screens across Nicholas's private network went black, replaced by a single audit banner that locked every terminal outside his direct control. In the mansion, Sabrina froze as the monitor in front of her displayed the same stark message: unauthorized. Transfer detected, session recorded. Simultaneously, Miles's office door opened. 2 security officers, hired quietly the week before, escorted him to a reserved conference room. Their compliance officers presented the real-time playback, unredacted logs, footage from the hidden cameras, the complete chain of custody. Miles sputtered explanations, testing environment, misunderstanding, yet the data spoke louder than any denial. In less than an hour, his access badges were revoked, devices seized, and a preliminary injunction signed. Across town, Sabrina found Nicholas waiting as she left the study. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand an apology, simply extended a folder, hard copy printouts of her bank transactions. Joint messages with Miles, a timeline cross, referenced against camera footage and server breaches. She attempted charm first, then indignation, then tears, each falling quietly before the fortress of proof. When she understood that nothing she said could rewrite the logs or wipe the tracer's path, her shoulders fell beneath the weight of consequence. Yet Nicholas felt no triumph, only a tempered relief that the facade had finally cracked. That evening, with legal wheels in motion and press releases drafted for dawn, Nicholas gathered Issa and Josephine in the living room. They reviewed the chain of events not to gloat, but to ensure transparency among the only allies who had not failed him. Issa listened intently, her small hands folded around a cup of cocoa. Josephine offered measured advice on media fallout, her voice both steady and kind. Nicholas realized then that loyalty did not always arrive armored in business titles. Sometimes it wore simpler garments, spoke softly, stood its ground without expectation of reward. Beyond the estate walls, news of the breach began to ripple through investor channels, but Nicholas felt no fear. The company's core remained intact. The algorithm, untouched in its true form, was safer now than it had ever been. More importantly, the lines between predator and guardian were unmistakably drawn as night settled. Nicholas stepped onto the balcony. Below, lights from the city glimmered like scattered code against a dark interface. For years he had trusted encryption more than people, firewalls more than feelings. But tonight, he understood that the strongest security protocol could ever deploy was forged not in silicon, but in the quiet courage of those who chose to stand beside him. When deception surged at the gates, tomorrow would bring headlines, court dates, and restructuring. Yet beneath the din, a new architecture had already taken shape, one built on vigilance, tempered with empathy, strategy guided by conscience, and a family defined not by blood, but by an unspoken pact to protect what truly mattered, and for Nicholas that pact was the greatest upgrade his life could ever receive. In the weeks that followed, the noise was deafening. Headlines surged across the digital landscape, particles dissecting betrayal, boardroom power plays, and the fall of a golden team. Investors called, competitors speculated, and analysts scrambled to piece together how 2 of Nicholas Harlan's most trusted allies had nearly pulled off the theft of a generation. But inside the walls of his estate there was no panic, no fire to extinguish. The fire had already burned, and what remained was solid ground. The algorithm stayed where it had always belonged, offline, encrypted, and untouched. The decoy now, fully exposed, served as a digital Trojan horse for the legal case. By the time Sabrina's lawyers attempted negotiations, the evidence had already looped through the judicial circuit, clean and airtight. Miles, stripped of his titles and shares, faced public disgrace and the very real possibility of criminal sentencing. Sabrina fled the spotlight, her carefully constructed reputation unraveling with each leaked message, each frozen asset, each day. The silence from Nicholas remained, but none of this brought satisfaction. Nicholas hadn't orchestrated the downfall for revenge. He hadn't built the trap to prove his genius. He had done it to protect the one thing he hadn't known he was building until it was nearly stolen from him, a home rooted not in brilliance or profit, but in trust. Quietly, he began reshaping his life. The estate, once governed by cold precision, softened in its purpose. The sterile silence of his office now shared space with laughter echoing from the halls. Isa, once a quiet observer, took on a new rhythm, one filled with curiosity and confidence. Her corkboard was replaced by a real digital workspace in a spare room Nicholas converted into a lab just for her. It had monitors, neural maps, and stacks of books far beyond her grade level. When she spoke like a architect, and Nicholas listened not because she was a child, but because she had earned that voice. Josephine remained not as staff, but as something closer to family. Her role evolved into something unofficial yet vital: a counselor, a compass. The company restructured. Nicholas offered her a seat on the board overseeing ethics and internal transparency. She declined the title, but agreed to advise, knowing her wisdom came not from degrees, but from a lifetime of watching quietly, feeling deeply, recognizing truths others ignored. Nicholas also implemented sweeping changes at the company. He dismantled the hierarchy that had once protected deceit and constructed a new model: transparent, decentralized, built to reward not just innovation, but integrity. A new division was born, dedicated to training young minds in ethical tech development. He named it the Fiancée initiative. Word spread quickly. Investors who had initially pulled back began to return, not out of greed, but out of respect. What Nicholas had survived wasn't just a breach, it was a crucible, and he had emerged not broken, but refined. Yet the most profound shift happened not in his company, but in him, where once his life was calibrated in clean code and planned contingencies. Now he allowed space for the unplanned. Saturday mornings became tech-free zones reserved for Ice's baking experiments, for long walks with Josephine, for mornings when he simply sat by the window and let the world pass without optimizing it. He no longer feared vulnerability. He understood now that the very thing he had spent a lifetime guarding against was the key to the life he never knew he wanted. Trust. Real trust wasn't blind. It wasn't naive. It was a risk, a conscious, brave decision to let others hold part of your heart, knowing it might not come back whole, and still choosing to give it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Nicholas stood by the window and watched Isa playing in the garden. The breeze caught her hair, and her laughter rang out like the kind of freedom that only lives where safety is rooted in love. Josephine sat nearby with a book, occasionally glancing up, her presence a steady rhythm in the background. Nicholas didn't speak. He didn't need to. He felt it. This was the life that betrayal tried to destroy. Couldn't touch, not because of stronger firewalls or sharper intellect, but because of three things that no line of code could replicate: loyalty, resilience, and the quiet, so unexpected power of chosen family. And as the sky darkened and the first stars began to pierce through, Nicholas realized that the man who once believed control was everything had discovered something far greater: peace. Not the kind born from solitude, the kind born from being truly seen, still wholeheartedly protected. In the end, it wasn't his fortune or firewalls that saved him, but the quiet loyalty of a housekeeper, the sharp eyes of a child, and the strength to rebuild not with control, but with trust. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and share in the comments what part moved you the most. We'll be waiting for your voice. See you in the next one.